The Morrison family's annual Easter brunch at Dad's estate was proceeding with elegant efficiency when Aunt Patricia asked the inevitable question about my absence from yet another family gathering. 28 relatives sat around the expansive patio table, enjoying mimosas and discussing everyone's latest achievements while my empty chair served as a silent reminder of the family's ongoing disappointment. At 32, I had become the sister who was perpetually somewhere else for family events, working what everyone assumed was some entry-level position that required extensive travel but offered little advancement or prestige. My successful siblings were all present: Marcus, the investment banker, Victoria, the corporate attorney, and Daniel, the pharmaceutical sales director who just bought his second vacation home. "Where's Sarah this time?" Aunt Patricia asked with the patient tone reserved for discussing family members with unstable employment. "Still traveling for that little job of hers?" Dad set down his champagne flute with obvious discomfort. "She's just abroad working," he replied with diplomatic vagueness, clearly hoping to avoid detailed discussion of my seemingly unsuccessful career trajectory. The relatives nodded sympathetically at what they perceived as my apparent professional struggles. Uncle Robert, a successful real estate developer, shook his head with charitable concern. "Poor girl, all that traveling for work rarely leads anywhere substantial. No stability, no real advancement opportunities." "Exactly," agreed cousin Jennifer, who worked in marketing for a luxury hotel chain. "International travel sounds exciting when you're young, but it's usually a sign that someone's stuck in entry-level positions without clear promotion paths." Victoria, resplendent in her designer Easter dress, added with sisterly concern, "Sarah's been doing this traveling work for 6 years now. At some point she needs to settle down and find a proper career with actual growth potential." Marcus nodded from his prominent position at the head table. "The constant travel is probably why she can't maintain relationships or build equity. No successful professional needs to be away from home that much." I wasn't physically present to defend myself, but my absence had become a regular topic of family conversation at gatherings where everyone else could showcase their traditional achievements and stable lifestyles. "It's sad really," Mom added with maternal worry. "All that education and she's still bouncing around the world doing whatever little assignments they give her. We raised her to expect more from life." "Does anyone know exactly what kind of work she does overseas?" Cousin Michael asked. "The details are always so vague when she calls." Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Something with international organizations. Policy work, I think. Nothing very concrete or impressive." Through the estate's tall windows, the family could see Dad's pristine lawn stretching toward the tree line. The peaceful domestic scene was about to be dramatically interrupted. "Well," Uncle Robert declared, raising his mimosa, "here's to family members who understand the value of building real careers at home instead of chasing adventure abroad." The toast was interrupted by the distant sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the east. The helicopter noise grew steadily louder as relatives continued their brunch conversation, initially assuming it was routine air traffic. The sound became impossible to ignore when the aircraft appeared directly above the estate, circling with obvious purpose. "What kind of helicopter makes that much noise?" Cousin Jennifer asked, covering her ears as the rotors created a thunderous downdraft. "Looks military," Marcus observed, squinting upward at the large aircraft with official markings. "Why would military helicopters be flying over residential areas?" Before anyone could speculate further, the helicopter began descending toward Dad's back lawn, its rotors creating an artificial windstorm that sent napkins flying and forced relatives to grab their champagne flutes. "It's landing!" Aunt Patricia exclaimed in shock. "Why is a military helicopter landing on our lawn?" Dad stood up from his chair with obvious bewilderment. "This has to be some mistake. We don't have any connection to military operations." The helicopter touched down with practiced precision on the estate's manicured grass, its rotors still spinning as two figures in official uniforms emerged from the aircraft. They moved with the purposeful stride of people accustomed to urgent government business. "Ladies and gentlemen," one of the uniformed officers called out through a portable speaker system, "please remain seated while we conduct official business." The Easter brunch had transformed into what appeared to be a government operation as additional personnel secured the landing area and established communication equipment near the helicopter. "Official business?" Victoria whispered weakly. What does the military want with our family? The lead officer approached the patio with a clipboard and official documents, clearly searching for someone specific among the confused relatives. "Excuse me," he called out to Dad, "we're looking for Ambassador Sarah Morrison. Is she available for immediate consultation?" The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the helicopter's cooling engines clicking in the background. "Ambassador?" Dad repeated weakly. "I think there's been some mistake. My daughter Sarah works for some international organization. She's not an ambassador." The officer consulted his documentation with professional efficiency. "Sir, according to our records, Ambassador Sarah Elizabeth Morrison is currently assigned to this residence for Easter leave. We have urgent G7 coordination requiring her immediate input." Uncle Robert's mimosa glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the patio stones. "G7 coordination?" Marcus managed to stammer. "Yes, sir," the officer replied matter-of-factly. "Ambassador Morrison coordinates policy responses between allied governments for situations requiring immediate diplomatic intervention." The officer's radio crackled with an urgent voice. "Ambassador Morrison, G7 crisis escalation requires immediate consultation with allied foreign ministers. Emergency session convenes in 90 minutes. Copy that," a familiar voice responded through the radio. Ambassador Morrison responding. "Patch me through to the secretary." The voice coming through the military radio was unmistakably mine, speaking with professional authority that none of the brunch relatives had ever heard before. "Dad," my voice continued through the communication system, "I'm sorry to interrupt Easter brunch, but the situation in Eastern Europe requires immediate diplomatic coordination with G7 partners." Dad stared at the radio as if it were an alien artifact. "Sarah? You're really an ambassador?" "Ambassador Sarah Morrison, yes," the military officer confirmed. "She's been coordinating allied responses to international security threats for the past 3 years. Today's emergency involves preventing economic destabilization across multiple European markets." Victoria looked like she might need medical attention. "Sarah's preventing economic destabilization?" "Ma'am," the officer explained, "Ambassador Morrison developed the current framework for G7 crisis response. Her diplomatic protocols have prevented several international conflicts from escalating into larger economic or military confrontations." My voice returned through the radio with professional urgency. "Officer Johnson, please inform the family that I'll need to cut Easter leave short. The foreign ministers are standing by for emergency consultation about coordinated sanctions and economic response measures." "Copy that, Ambassador. Should we establish secure communications for your briefing?" "Affirmative. Set up the mobile command center on Dad's back lawn. I'll coordinate from there before helicopter transport to Andrews Air Force Base." The Easter brunch had officially become a diplomatic operations center as military personnel began establishing communication equipment across Dad's pristine landscaping. Marcus found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Sarah, you coordinate with foreign ministers? When international crises require rapid allied response," my voice explained through the speakers, "the G7 ambassadors coordinate economic and diplomatic measures to prevent regional conflicts from becoming global problems." Aunt Patricia was staring at the military helicopter as if it were a mirage. "But we assumed you were struggling professionally. You assumed I was unsuccessful because my work operates behind classified doors rather than in public business achievements," my voice replied calmly. "The diplomatic successes you don't hear about are often the most important ones." The military officer was consulting his secure tablet. "Ambassador Morrison, the European markets are showing early volatility indicators. The G7 partners need your assessment for coordinated intervention strategies." "Understood. Begin establishing the secure link with Brussels, Berlin and London. I'll join the emergency session from the mobile command center." Dad was gripping his champagne flute as if it might provide stability. "Sarah, when you said you worked in international policy, I meant I coordinate diplomatic responses that prevent international conflicts and economic crises," my voice responded. "When I mentioned traveling for policy meetings, I was referring to emergency sessions with allied governments and United Nations security briefings." Uncle Robert was staring at his shattered mimosa glass, probably calculating how international economic stability affected his real estate investments. Investments that depended on exactly the kind of diplomatic coordination I provided. "The mobile command center is operational," Officer Johnson announced. "Ambassador Morrison, you're clear for G7 emergency consultation." As military personnel completed their communication setup on Dad's Easter lawn, the family sat in stunned silence, processing the revelation that their unsuccessfully traveling relative was actually coordinating responses to international crises with world leaders. The Easter brunch concluded with relatives watching in fascination as I conducted classified briefings with G7 foreign ministers from Dad's backyard, coordinating economic sanctions and diplomatic responses while military personnel maintained secure communications. "Sarah," Dad said quietly as the emergency consultation ended, "I owe you an enormous apology. We had no idea about your actual responsibilities." "You had no idea because you assumed my international travel meant professional instability rather than diplomatic necessity," I replied through the radio before helicopter departure. "Every time I mentioned policy coordination or crisis response, you heard entry-level assignments because that's what you expected. But why didn't you correct our assumptions?" Mom asked weakly. "Because most of my work is classified," I explained. "I can't discuss the details of diplomatic negotiations or crisis interventions. The parts one could mention, you've spent 6 years dismissing as unimportant international busy work." 3 months later, when my work preventing the European economic crisis earned public recognition, Dad framed the presidential commendation and placed it prominently in his study. The Easter brunch became family legend. The day when military helicopters transformed holiday celebration into diplomatic operations center. Dad learned to ask about my international assignments rather than assume them. Marcus eventually apologized for years of assumptions, admitting he'd been measuring success by visible business achievements rather than understanding work that actually influenced global stability. The estate's lawn now bears permanent impressions from the helicopter landing, serving as a reminder that family members sometimes serve national interests in ways that can't be measured by traditional career metrics. Victoria learned that her traveling sister was actually protecting the international economic stability that her corporate law firm depended on for multinational clients. The military's thank you letter to Dad became a treasured family artifact, acknowledging the estate's cooperation in facilitating emergency G7 coordination during a family holiday. Dad's dismissive phrase, "she's just abroad working," became family shorthand for the dangers of underestimating quiet achievements, especially when those achievements involve preventing international conflicts while relatives are enjoying mimosas. The estate now includes a small memorial plaque near the helicopter landing site, commemorating the Easter when diplomatic crisis management interrupted family brunch and taught everyone that success sometimes wears military uniforms rather than business suits.